Hello and welcome back to Through the Doorway. I'm Tom,
I'm Dana.
and this week's topic, we made it kind of a interesting one. We kind of singled out a specific type of thing. This time it is about headless ghosts.
Yes.
So, I know it sounds like a weird topic, but, you know, it is what it is. What are your thoughts on headless ghosts to begin with?
You see them a lot. They're really popular in a lot of like media. One of them that we're gonna talk about is the whole Sleepy Hollow Headless Horseman. That one is fiction. It's not actually real. But you do see the way that that one seems to influence other cultures, because I think that's where a lot of people started coming up with the whole headless ghost trope. And then, of course, I mean, anybody who's seen Harry Potter has seen where in the one they go to that Death Day party, and of course there was a whole headless hunt. So I think that's what really spawned where headless ghosts became super popular. There's plenty of them. We picked three that we're going to go over with this episode, but I'm sure that we'll come across more in the future. So there might be a part two to this.
Might be. It's just a little bit of a different topic this time. Instead of just going after pure ghosts, we singled out a particular type. Because when you look at a lot of research, say for instance like the Lady in White and stuff like that, it seems almost like every country, every state seems to have their own version of it. So we just wanted to see how this went for the most part. So actually, we're going to be starting with a version of the Headless Horseman. This one is actually from, I believe, Scotland.
Yes.
So let me take a look at my points here.
This one we found in this book here, which is, it's one of the Time Life books. It is called Mysteries of the Unknown Phantom Encounters.
Yep. And if I'm not mistaken, even though it's not here on my notes, I believe this happened back in 15 something, like 1530 or something like that.
It's this one right here that we're going to be going over.
It should have a date in there, right? Can you confirm the date for me? Just
1538.
1538. So this.
In your notes. It's just further down.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. I did not know that. But anyway, this started with actually family members. It's members of the MacLean clan from Scotland. They were from the district of Lochbuie. Did I say it right?
I think so. I mean, they do more pronunciation than we do, but...
Okay, but Lochbuie, Scotland.
Basically, this whole family had a fear of, not really a fear, but they shunned. In the evenings, they would hear the sound of clattering hooves and a jingling bridle off of a horse. And so the whole family basically shun the sounds when they hear them at night. They are really fearful of a spectral horse bearing a headless rider who forebodes death. So basically they believe that they would see this horse with its headless rider and then they would die.
Right. And apparently what's interesting about this is supposedly this headless horseman has a name.
Yes, they know exactly who this ghost belonged to.
They say the name of the rider is Ewan?
Ewan of the Little Head.
Yeah, okay. He was the son and heir of the MacLean chief, but he actually envied his father's wealth and started feuding with him.
Yeah, the son basically, he was the heir, so when the father died, he'd have been head of the family and gotten all the money anyway. But, sometimes you've seen it where, like, the son wants basically what's owed to him now. He doesn't want to wait. And I think that's what happened here, is that the son envied the fact his father was head of the family, made all the final decisions, basically controlled the wealth and who in the family got what.
Right.
You know, he was responsible for working for his own money. He only got a certain allowance from the family fortune, you know, per week or per month or whatever, and he didn't want to have to work for his main money. He wanted the whole thing so he could basically just sit back and do whatever he wanted, and that's the impression I get when it talks about how he started feuding
But
with his
apparently,
father.
they argued a lot,
Oh yeah.
and then they finally decided to settle things with arms, most likely swords, I would believe.
Considering he was decapitated, yes.
But back then,
I'm not sure if guns actually existed back in the 1500s. I think it was pretty much all bladed weapons and like arrows.
I'm not pretending that I know anything about all that. But all I know is apparently it was in 1538. The father and son led their partisans into battle. Partisans were followers, or like a small little army that followed, certain individuals. So they actually went to war with one another.
Yeah. In this case, you could look at it that the father and son were opposing kings and their small little army troop. I mean, you hear the same thing when it comes to like Robin Hood. Robin Hood had his own band of merry men. They would have been his partisan,
Right.
And they went against the sheriff of Nottingham and the king's brother, and their like castle guard group that they fought with all the time would have been the sheriff's partisan. And so that was basically what happened, was they took their own little groups and they decided they were going to battle.
But what got interesting about this is it wasn't the father that actually dealt the killing blow. It was actually one of his followers during the battle.
Yes, the son Ewan was beheaded during the battle by one of his father's men. From the time of the battle in 1538 all the way into the 20th century, apparently there have been many witnesses who have told how the Headless Rider comes to harvest the souls of the McLeans who live in Lochbuie.
Yeah.
And something about this that was interesting is that this messenger of doom supposedly had a deadly omen of his own. According to one story, on the evening before the battle, Ewan met up with the fairy washing woman, which is a Scottish folklore figure akin to the Irish banshee and the Welsh hag of the Dribble. So, and that's probably going to be a future episode, but we're going to do something that kind of talks about these, because a lot of them, especially in like the Welsh and the Irish and the Scottish, they all seem to have a lot of the same like death omen type figures.
Right, exactly.
But apparently Ewan saw his own death omen figure the night before battle.
In this case, though, it explained how this works is on the eve of battles, it was it the Hag of the Dribbles?
No, the fairy washing woman.
The fairy washing woman's thing was, it was her function to wash blood from garments of combatants who were destined to die. It is said that Owen was walking along a stream that evening when he saw the old woman crouched by the water rinsing a pile of blood-stained shirts. He asked if his own shirt was there and was told that it was, but he might avoid his doom if the next morning his wife, with no prompting, served him butter with his breakfast. Now, I find that interesting. I'm not sure how that works, but we are eventually going to look into this fairy.
Yeah, we might come up with why, or maybe, because butter is such a random thing to base your fate on. I'm kind of curious. We might actually make that our next episode. I'm kind of curious to know whether with her it's constantly butter the next morning can somehow keep them alive, or if that was just what she decided.
But in this case, unfortunately, his wife was an indifferent cook, and no butter appeared on the table.
Yeah, so the legend says that since his wife didn't serve him butter with breakfast, and it's not like he could hint or tell her to get him butter, because that would have been prompting for her to give it to him. But the fact that he didn't get butter with his breakfast, it says that he was a luckless man who stoically munched his dry bread and then rode into battle that morning knowing he would not ride home that night.
Correct.
So I'm inclined to believe this. I mean, it would be relatively easy to actually look and see whether these people actually existed back then in Scotland.
Well,
I mean, the fact that they didn't list a father's name in this story, but the fact that they actually had the sons and you could like legit trace it to a clan, I'm
the
more
McLeans.
I'm more inclined to believe that this is something that did happen. It just might not have through time, because this was the 1500s. I'm sure that they've probably lost like a bit of the facts. This is just what's remembered of it.
But this seems to be the original Headless Horseman.
Yeah, from this far back in history, I would say that it probably is, in fact, the first Headless Horseman that is like publicized and acknowledged.
Yes. So what do you think about all that, though?
I definitely think it's interesting, and I do see where it is most likely to potentially be true. Like I said, I do like the fact that they give you the name, they give you some other facts like the family, the location, the fact that it's got so many points of reference.
Right.
I think really leads to where you can in fact look this up if you chose. So I am more inclined to say, yeah, I do believe in this one.
But you see, it makes me wonder if the story of this Headless Horseman actually inspired the writer of Sleepy Hollow somehow to use the Headless Horseman. You get what I'm saying?
Maybe.
See, I don't know though. I'm just speculating. I'm not 100% sure on that. I mean, he could have just thought of a Headless Horseman. You know, I mean, it's possible. But usually everybody gets an idea from something that already exists.
I
usually.
think that this might have why don't we do the Headless Horseman Sleepy Hollow next?
You want to do Sleepy Hollow?
So
Horseman?
the interesting thing, I didn't look up the Headless Horseman in a book because, like I said, this is fiction. I did look this up on Wikipedia. It's the Headless Horseman story was based off of a novel that a American writer did. His name was Washington Irving.
Back in 1819.
Yeah. He actually wrote this story while he was abroad in England. And the story, they're saying the Headless Horseman character was based off of a Hessian soldier?
Let me see. It was believed to be a Hessian soldier who was decapitated by a cannonball in battle.
Yeah.
That is a bad way to get decapitated.
Yes, because not only do you lose your head pretty much is non-existent at that point, I would think. You know, getting hit straight in the face.
Now, apparently Hessians were German soldiers.
Yes, they were auxiliary soldiers from Germany who basically were helping the British Army during the American Revolutionary War. And this war ran from April of 1775 until July 4th of 76. So it really only lasted not even a full year.
Right.
Well, no, just over a full year. So it wasn't a long war when you really get into some of them that have been fought over the years. But the story is based off, they're saying the character is based off this Hessian soldier. So the soldier was actually from Germany when you really get down to it. And he was just kind of like on loan to the British Army.
Right. Of course, you know Walt Disney produced an adaptation of it in 1949. Of course, that was a more light-hearted one, even though it still could be creepy to kids. It was a
light-hearted, family-friendly.
Yes.
And they didn't even title it, Sleepy Hollow, anything, Headless Horseman, anything to that effect. It was called The Adventures of Ichabod Crane and Mr. Toad.
Right.
And those of us, I mean, a lot of us grew up who were born in like the 80s and all that. I was born mid-80s, but if you were born before like the 1990 to 1995. Every Halloween, you've probably seen this on Disney because they used to play it on Halloween all the time.
Probably.
I remember every year when I was little, like watching it on TV. I've even
Well,
got it on VHS somewhere where my
well,
grandmother recorded it one year for
when
us.
I was a kid, I didn't really take to Disney too well. I mean, I did see, what you're talking about. I did see that,
You got a little bit more leeway growing up. I was raised by my grandparents.
you know.
So they my grandmother was very like into what she would and would not let me and my sister watch, what we could and could not listen to, music wise. Up until I was 13 years old, I was really only allowed to listen to oldies or country music, unless I was with my uncle, and then I would actually get to listen to some rock. But but yeah, so I mean, they have the family friendly version, and I don't fully remember the animated Disney version. What they did with the Disney one is they basically exaggerated the chase. They made the whole legend about the chase of, Ichabod was returning home one night.
That's where the real excitement is with it, though. If you think about
yeah,
it, is
so
that
they
chase.
capitalized on the thrill of that hunt.
Yeah.
When you really get down to it, but they made it kind of like family friendly.
But they also made it to where the Headless Horseman was a ghost.
Yes.
He was a ghost in that.
In the original story, it was predicted that the Headless Horseman was actually one of the locals who dressed up. In the Disney version, they did make it an actual ghost.
Yes.
So that is one of the major differences. The story of Sleepy Hollow, Legend of the Headless Horseman, it took place in Tawny Town, which is actually up in New York, and for the longest time, I mean, the locals there had called their town Sleepy Hollow. I'm not sure where they got that in reference to Tawny Town. I guess because nothing, ever really happened there. They did officially change the name of their town in, I think it was 1997 to Sleepy Hollow.
But the story is set in 1790.
Yes,
in a Dutch settlement of Tawny Town.
There's it's kind of, I guess it would be kind of like a little suburb of Tawny Town.
That's what I would think.
Nowadays we would just call it a suburb of like a major city, like how Glen, where we live, is a suburb of whatever. Like you've got Baltimore City here in Maryland. Right outside of it, you've got Baltimore County, which could be considered a suburb of the city itself. It's kind of the same thing. But yeah, this was an old Dutch settlement that was here in the New York State area back in the late 1700s, and that's where the story apparently takes place. And apparently Ichabod Crane was from Connecticut, and he was up there. I don't know if he was up there like on a work visa, like maybe they put in, because I know like you used to have people who would travel across country to because a western town or something would put out a notice, hey, we're looking for a doctor.
Right.
And you'd have people who would apply for the position by telegram, and if they were granted the position, they would move basically they could move from Boston all the way to Colorado or Texas or somewhere because they took this post. And I think that might be kind of like what Ichabod did in this case. So he was originally born and raised in Connecticut. He was from Connecticut, and he ended up in New York to teach. He was a school teacher. But apparently, Ichabod Crane was very superstitious.
Yes.
He would listen to all the old Dutch wives' tales and all the local legends. Apparently, this area had a lot of, like, local haunted history that would be told about by the villagers. So he would kind of go, visit them. He would find out all he could, because as a school teacher he was big in wanting that knowledge. And the legend says that he had a rivalry with a local man, and this would have been the local popular guy.
His name was Abraham Bones von Brunt.
Yes. And this legend has a lot of people with, like, Von whatever as their last names. So,
and part of the problem with this was Ichabod and Brom were both competing for the hand of an 18-year-old girl named Katrina von Tassel.
Yes, she was the only child of a wealthy local farmer, and from what I gather from the story, this her father, Mr. Von Tassel, was probably had the biggest farm and the most money from that farm. It sounds like he probably grew and sold crops to basically the entire village and maybe even some of the surrounding villages. He was like, think of the story Beauty and the Beast, how Gaston was like the local favorite. Everybody loved him, even if he was rowdy and caused some trouble now and then. He was, in a sense, the local hero. That's who this Brom guy was.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you put Beast in Belle's position and then put Belle in the position of the prince being like this big rich figure, basically the two of them were competing for her.
Right.
And the legend says that it seems like Ichabod was competing for her not only because she was young and beautiful, but also because he wanted access to the father's wealth. Because then I guess he would be able to learn whatever he wanted without actually having to be a teacher anymore. You know, and that's the impression the legend gave. But they competed, and apparently Brom was always trying to get Ichabod to like have a physical duel so they could settle it, and Ichabod wouldn't, because he was this scrawny, lanky, school teacher. He didn't really know anything about fighting. He didn't have any kind of physical strength for it. So he would always, he would find a way to not be talked into the challenge. And the legend went on and said, Ichabod he kind of like put himself into everybody's good graces because he would help out the locals. He would help them with like any kind of repair tasks, little odds and ends. So he was kind of putting himself out there to become to give a better impression to the locals, I guess you would say. And he figured that would help him with securing Katrina's hand in marriage,
Which
I guess.
he did not.
No.
However, I believe that was after the harvest party was thrown by Van Tassel's.
Yeah, apparently it was the big thing every year. Her father would get some of the locals to come out and help with the harvest, especially the younger boys. They would earn pocket money and stuff coming out and helping, and it would teach them how to do the harvest so that they could, get jobs and all that kind of stuff. But every year he would throw this big giant harvest party. They'd have a big feast, and there'd be music and dancing and alcohol, and people would tell like local legend stories and history and all that kind of stuff. So it was like the to-do party of the year every year that this guy threw.
Pretty much, but after this party, Ichabod encountered a cloaked rider at an intersection in the swamp area.
Yes. So the story goes that Ichabod, he drank and ate and danced and listened to all the ghost stories and stuff. And then he was hoping to propose to Katrina after the party, which he failed in securing her hand. So then he had this little plow horse, which is where the donkey-like horse in the show comes in. And so he was making his way home, and he would go past all these like haunted history places that he had just got done hearing all these tales about at the party. And so as he was going, he was passing these places, he was thinking of all this haunted stories he had just got done hearing.
Right.
And that's how, like in the Disney one, that's why you see where as he's going, he's kind of glancing around, he's keeping an eye on his surroundings, he's getting kind of nervous.
But here's...
Yeah, so he gets to the edge of the swamp where, the one path goes into the swamp, the other keeps going.
But before we go on with that, we have to explain that it was said that the horseman would vanish in a flash of fire and brimstone if you could make it to the bridge adjacent to the old Dutch burying ground.
Yeah.
This is what prompted the race to the bridge in this whole story.
Yeah, all the locals, and I think it was actually Brom who was the one most known for telling the story of the horseman. But all the stories that were told to the people locally said that if you encountered this horseman when you were out and about at night, that if you could get to that bridge, he couldn't cross the bridge. So if you made it to the bridge, you were safe. And so when he ran into the horseman, he was like, "Oh God, I have to get to this bridge." And so he like booked it and, pushed his horse as hard as he can to make it to the bridge before the horseman could catch him. Um, Not to say that he probably wasn't scared out of his mind, because, if you look over and you see somebody on a horse and, you're kind of like surprised at the big size. I mean, this horseman was reported to be a very large man with broad shoulders, really tall, lots of muscle. I'd kind of be iffy about it too if I looked over and saw this big guy and he has no head. His head is sitting in front of him.
But what happens next? Of course, we all know he gets chased. He makes it to the bridge, but then the horseman throws the pumpkin.
He throws his head at him.
Yeah, his pumpkin head at him. And of course, from there, the next morning, Ichabod had disappeared, and it was never known if he had fled the area or was killed and his body was disposed of. And apparently, Katrina ended up marrying Brahm in the end.
Yeah, so
it could be speculated that it could have been Brahm all along, just scaring him.
A lot of people think, well, apparently from what I saw of the on the Wikipedia, apparently the next morning Ichabod's horse was found outside his house grazing.
Mm-hmm.
The only stuff found next to the bridge was his hat and the trampled saddle from his horse. And so nobody knows what happened to Ichabod. Rumors around the village were that he, was so scared that he fled to start over somewhere else. Other rumors are that, he died and his body was disposed of.
So there
were rumors that it was Brahm dressed as the horseman and he used a jack-o'-lantern as the head prop to scare Ichabod. There were rumors that Brahm had dressed up as the horseman and killed him. They never actually found out what did or did not happen because, like we said, Ichabod just kind of disappeared.
But knowing that Ichabod was, in the story, he's superstitious, my bet would be is that Brahm probably thought it would have been easier to scare him out of town.
Yeah, and I think that's
what would have happened.
I think that's what happened, actually, is I think that this Brahm guy
but it's open up to interpretation, It's what you believe happened to him in that. But as a final note on this guy, the Headless Horseman was also sometimes referred to as the Galloping Hassan of the Hollow.
Yeah, so you've got the Headless Horseman, and I think that was mostly just because of the fact that he rode a horse. But he was also known as the Galloping Hessian of the Hollow. That's why I'm kind of unsure, like, if the character's based off of a Hessian soldier who was decapitated by cannonball. That's what always got me, is, when I was reading this, is it's like, okay, I can kind of see where that would cause somebody to lose their head. I could also see, why that made this ghost a headless ghost, but, I mean, unless the battle somehow involved horses and he was decapitated while he was riding his horse, I didn't really understand where they got Headless Horseman from.
Mm-hmm.
Because, but then, like we said, we have no idea which battle or where they actually based this soldier off of. Apparently there were a couple of battles during the Revolutionary War that took place in the nearby area of that part of New York. And so that's, I guess, what they're saying. And apparently there is a local legend up there about the horseman that, he still appears in the dead of night sometimes, and he basically rides towards the site of the battle he's looking for his head. Or he's looking for somebody else to take theirs, or something of that nature.
I'm not saying there isn't a real headless horseman there, but the horseman that we just described, he's pure fiction. He
Yes.
was pure fiction.
There is a local legend, and I don't know if it's something that popped up because of the war, or if it was, because of the fact that this guy wrote this book that they started the local legend. They do have a couple of legends about a headless ghost on a horse up there who rides towards the battle site and looks for his head. But the actual legend of Sleepy Hollow regarding the headless horseman and Ichabod Crane, that is a pure work of fiction. So these names, the characters, I mean, I'm sure that they might have been based off of actual people when it comes to the characters, because I mean, that's the whole thing, is any author, when they have a story, they base the characters on usually actual people.
Pretty much.
Unless it's a fantasy thing, and then they'll just kind of they'll figure out what they want the world and the limitations to be, and they'll be like, okay, we need this type of character, this type of character, and this type of character, and then they'll come up with, descriptions and abilities and names based off of that. I think in this case, he probably had access to more records and tales, being as he was over in England at the time.
Mm-hmm.
They definitely had the bigger army when it came to the war, because they could just, import people on ships from, one country to the other. But I think he probably found stories from the war and of people who lived in the village around that time, and he probably based his characters around those people.
But I mean, you can't rule it out, because
it doesn't say one way or the other whether he actually based them on living actual people, or if
I know, but it's like you hear things about Gettysburg, right? The whole battlefield where Gettysburg is supposed to be haunted. Do you see what I'm saying? So you don't know what he did. He could have came up with all of it. Some of it could have had truth to it. I mean,
the interesting thing,
it goes back to like our last episode, like I was saying, right? The Headless Horseman might not exist, right? But it's also possible somebody dressed up as a Headless Horseman. Then guess what? It exists. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
For that moment, it exists because they are dressed up as it, and you don't know if it's real or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there's I think what's interesting about when I decided, because I wasn't sure whether the legend of Sleepy Hollow was actually real or not. I've never really done a whole lot of research on it. I do know the story. But when you think of a headless horseman or a headless ghost, I think that is probably the most common one that pops into everybody's mind, because they've made such a big deal out of this story. I mean, it's had TV shows, it's had movies, multiple movies, in fact. It's had, alterations story-wise as books. It's just been such a big deal. So I was like, let's read up on this one. Let's throw the information in there with the other headless ghosts that we're going to discuss. The detail of the places and the names and the things that happen that they put into this story, if they wouldn't have told me that this story was fiction and was not actually based on any kind of fact, I legit would have read all this and been like, oh, hey, that's something interesting that happened.
Mm-hmm.
And even just reading all of the bulletin points of, the stuff that we looked up for the legend, you have to constantly go back and tell yourself, this is fiction, it's not actually real, because it sure as hell sounds real, doesn't it?
Sure does.
And that's a credit to this writer.
But But what makes things interesting is the first one that we talked about was kind of dark.
Yeah.
It was kind of dark.
Still.
But, the Headless Horseman wasn't a really dark story. I mean, yeah, it's got a little bit of a creep factor to it, but it's not a dark.
The story was a gothic story, is what they classified it as when it was written.
Right.
But when you actually get into the legend, I mean, the only reason it classifies, in my opinion, as a gothic story is because there's so much, like, local legend and ghost knowledge that apparently gets distributed throughout this town.
Mm-hmm.
When you really get down to it, though, the story itself, and honestly, this classification didn't exist back then, which might also be why it was labeled gothic.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mystery thriller.
Kind of.
That's exactly, it's a mystery thriller.
It's just an open-ended.
You don't know if the legend is real or not. You don't know if the ghost is real or not.
You don't know what happened.
You don't know what happened to Ichabod.
Right.
So it's, the thriller part of it is all the suspense and action, but it's a mystery.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean.
Now the next one that we're going to get into, this gets very dark.
Yes, it does.
Very dark, and what's even stranger about it, it's back in our home state again, of Maryland.
We are back to Maryland.
We are back to Weird Maryland, but not only just Weird Maryland, we are also...
We found information for this in 2 different
Haunted
books.
Annapolis.
So, in Weird Maryland, this legend is called the Headless Dumpster Diver of Annapolis.
Now, when you hear this, all right, we have no clue why it's called the Headless Dumpster Diver. There is nothing to do with that. I don't know why they named it that. But this gets very dark very quickly.
All right. So the one in Weird Maryland actually differs a bit from the Haunted Annapolis book. The Haunted Annapolis book goes into a little bit more detail. So I'm going to go ahead and skim through and read a couple parts from the Weird Maryland book to you guys. And then all of Tom's notes deal with what I found in the Haunted Annapolis book. So I'm going to go through this one, and then we'll go through the other, and then that way we can point out where things differed. Sound like a plan to you?
Well, honestly, I thought you wanted to go over one point before we did either one of those, because there is something that's very...
So,
do you want this?
Yes.
I'll let you handle this part.
So, apparently both ones take place at Cornhill Street, which is in Annapolis. It basically intersected a couple of different things. It connected not only East Street with the downtown harbor, but it also connected it to the historic fish markets that were up there, because Annapolis back then was really big into the whole fishing industry.
Yeah.
Because not only did they have the harbor there, but they weren't super far from, the Chesapeake Bay. So it was like the the fishing capital of Maryland when you really get down to it. In the colonial era, the neighborhood was home to many watermen, which, were people who fished and all that kind of stuff. And, considering how close to the water they were, that's completely understandable. The way that the book started with the passage in Haunted Annapolis confused me, though, because it makes mention how in the heat of the summers during the 1770s, a lot of fevers made their way through many American cities. People would fall sick for multiple reasons, including bad water, terrible sanitation, and swarming mosquitoes. And apparently a lot of people who caught these fevers would either die from them, but the ones who survived were left horribly disfigured, I guess from radiation or something.
I'm thinking it was brought up so you would understand the time period maybe a little more, and what was going on in the time period that this comes from.
Smallpox was known to periodically appear.
Right.
That's what actually left the survivors disfigured, because, they would have the scars. But apparently, like 100 years later, because the whole story takes place in, I think it was like around 1870, 73, something like, so the early 1870s. So this is 100 years after the fact of these viruses sweeping the city.
I'm just saying that I think it did that to kind of give you an idea of what had been going on there prior to this.
I think what it was is that in the 1770s, all this virus swept the country
Right.
to a lot of the cities, and then basically 100 years later, they had a small resurgence of it. Is I think what happened. But we'll get into that in a moment. So apparently, in Annapolis, down by the water, in back alleys, rooting in trash cans, up by St. Anne's Church, over by St. Mary's, you name it, there isn't a place in Annapolis that hasn't played host to a translucent headless guy at some point. So, the book says that no ghost story is quite good enough if you can't get to the bottom of it, or in this case, the missing top of it. So they tried to figure out the story behind this walking torso, and so a lot of people with an eye towards history point towards Saint Justin the Martyr as a possible candidate, because in the later half of the 2nd century he was beheaded by the Romans for being a Christian. His bones rest in St. Mary's Garden in Annapolis. It is said that to spare desecration to his grave, his remains were dug up and sent to St. Mary's in 1873. So they're like, this guy is the prime candidate. But according to somebody else who runs the Ghosts of Annapolis tour, there's a story of an awful martyr and a deathbed confession that may explain the ghost. And me and Tom were actually talking about at some point possibly going up there and taking the haunted tour if it's still being offered. I know, COVID has kind of ruined a lot of stuff. We'll have to see whether that still goes on.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they would let us, film or take pictures for that tour, but we're gonna look into it. We might see that in a future episode. But so an elderly woman told this person that a pastor of St. Anne's Parish and several other witnesses had once heard the confession of a dying man as he told a tale of accidental death and dismemberment involving him and his brother. So in the early 1800s, many years before the man made his confession, he lived with his brother on Cornhill Street. The times were full of hard drinking and brawling, and sibling rivalry could sometimes turn nasty. And anybody with siblings could know that sometimes sibling rivalry can turn nasty. Me and my twin sister argued just as much as we got along and hung out growing up. So, apparently the brothers spent one drunken night arguing, getting more and more angry with each drink. By the time they got home, the fight had escalated to fisticuffs and eventually swordplay. With the impaired judgment typical of heavy drinking, it was inevitable somebody would get hurt, and sure enough, one of the brothers was stabbed and died. The surviving brother sobered up quickly. He knew he would swing for his crime, so his only option was to remove any identifying evidence. And since way back then they didn't have any kind of fingerprints or DNA, it was common to remove the head from a body to hide the identity of the murder victim. I guess because the head is easier to transport, and so even if they find the body, unless there's a definitive mark or something, they could never really tell who it was. And depending on how much the body had decayed, they couldn't even use that as an identifying factor. Anyway, apparently he chopped off the head and then staggered down to the waterfront with it and tossed it into the water. It was never seen again. As for the headless body, he buried it underneath the house. Precise location of the house is unknown. There have been a number of fires on that street in the early 1800s. It's entirely possible that the house is no longer standing. They assume that the corpse was still buried somewhere around there, but apparently he doesn't stay put. He goes out looking for his head by night. His murderer, his brother, didn't get off scot-free either. He may not have swung for his crime, but his deathbed confession tells how heavy a burden his deed laid upon his soul. Whether telling his secret eased his conscience or not, we can be fairly sure he won't be hanging out with St. Justin the Murderer anytime soon. But he did do us the favor of explaining the headless ghost, and for that small mercy, we should be grateful. So, essentially, the Weird Maryland book is saying that these two brothers, would go out drinking, they would come home and argue, and then the one killed the other when they were fighting while drunk, and then chopped off his head, threw it in the water, and then, buried the body under the house. The body was never found, all that.
Now, the version that comes out of this book is
Yes.
much more detailed and much darker.
This one, each story in the Haunted Annapolis book has its own chapter. This chapter is chapter 9, The Headless Ghost of Cornhill Street. It spans 5 pages in this book. And yeah, it's not a very big book, but also this writing is not super big, so that is a lot of information.
Yeah, so we have points on it here.
Yes.
Now, from what I gather, in that it explains that
the story starts in the early 1870s with a family of 4 who lived in this neighborhood of Cornhill Street. The entire family fell sick when the diseases swept back for a second pass.
And the parents died.
The parents died and left the 2 brothers as the only survivors of the family.
And the elder brother was just old enough to stand as guardian for the younger.
Yeah, the story goes that the brothers were about 5 years apart in age. And if I remember correctly, back then you had to be like 17 or 18 to take custody of somebody else. So, basically the one brother was just old enough to qualify as being a guardian for the younger, instead of them both ending up in some kind of orphanage.
But they continued to live in the house, but without their parents, they went over to the dark side of behavior. Their inheritance was spent on rum, beer, and brothels in Hell Point.
They, apparently it says that they squandered their inheritance on rum and beer in the taverns and brothels of Hell Point. I'm not too sure, like, I know we have Fells Point here in Baltimore. I'm not exactly sure what it means by Hell Point. I'm not familiar with the term, so I'm sure that wherever in Annapolis that it's no longer called that.
Probably.
But I guess it was kind of like the bad part of town, the red light district, as you would say, considering that's where the brothels and everything were. It was the seedier part of town. But they would go down there basically like every day, and they would drink. But that also comes into question of the ages, because if both brothers would go down there and get drunk, either you're letting a minor go down there to that kind of behavior, or, the youngest one was old enough.
I don't think the age was 21 back then.
Oh, I'm sure it was a lot younger.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, if the older one was just old enough to claim guardianship of the younger, they don't give you the ages, so I'm kind of confused.
But, however,
with the younger one being old enough to go into those.
Anyway, none of that's important. What we're getting at is when the money ran out, they made more in ways that their neighbor speculated about. So in other words, chances are they probably stole and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, the neighbors speculated once their inheritance ran out about how they were actually getting new money into the house. It wasn't seen whether they had a job. Nobody knew if they had a legitimate job, like what they worked doing.
Right.
Before the father passed, the sons used to work alongside him, so if they were getting money in a legit way, it was probably working down like at the harbor, like fishing, and at the fish market themselves.
Also, the house was the site of many drunken parties, which disturbed the neighbors who complained to the landlord of the property.
Yeah, so even though they were allowed to stay in the house, apparently the parents hadn't owned it because the property had a landlord.
Right.
And so what they would do is essentially they would go down to the bars and taverns, they would get drunk, they and all their friends would buy alcohol and come back to their house, and they would keep the party going when the establishments weren't open. And it really pissed off the neighbors. And if I had neighbors who did stuff like this, I'd be pretty mad too.
However, before the landlord could take action, the problems abruptly ceased. And the neighbors proudly took credit for it.
Yeah, so the landlord was going to go look into it and see whether he had to take them to court or whatever. But before he could even go talk to the brothers, all of the drunken parties and all of that kind of stopped, and the neighbors took credit for it. Because what it says is that after another night of shouting that ended in the sounds of crashing furniture and cursing, as the two brothers engaged in a drunken scuffle, quiet fell in the early hours of the morning, and the next afternoon, a delegation of neighbors rapped on the door of the house until the younger brother, bleary-eyed and clearly hungover, actually opened it. Um, so the story goes that these neighbors made their displeasure known, sternly informing him that there weren't going to be any more parties or disturbances in the night because they weren't going to put up with it. And if they did not immediately change their behavior, they would be taken to court. So the younger brother apologized and he promised to reform himself. And then the neighbors demanded to speak to the elder brother.
Right. Now, from that point, when they asked to talk to the older brother, the younger brother told them that the argument they had the night before had upset his elder brother so much that he'd gone to Baltimore.
Yeah, so basically the younger brother said that after the argument they had had the night before while they were drinking and fighting, that the elder brother had taken off and gone to Baltimore. But he apologized and promised to reform and cease with all the parties. And then apparently the neighbors never saw the older brother again. But the house stayed quiet. The younger brother came and went, but there were no parties or drunken arguments. No more fights in the night. So they said that it seemed in the absence of his guardian that the boy seemed to be making good on his promise to change his behavior.
Yep. And then from there, the peace was marred, however, by only one thing: an unpleasant odor that grew into a disturbing stench over the next few weeks. The smell was traced back to the brothers' house.
Yes. So they tried for weeks to figure out where this smell, and the smell got worse and worse. And I mean, you figure this was summertime. So eventually they realized that the smell was strongest at the house the two brothers had shared. And so the neighbors went over there and they were demanding to know what was going on, what the smell was from. And the brother kept telling them that, oh, he didn't know and all that. And he was kind of shifty about it and all that. So apparently the neighbors forced their way in so they could find out what the smell was. And at that point, I'm pretty sure they got the landlord involved too, because the landlord could give permission to search the property for the smell.
Probably. So what ended up happening next was, in the dirt-floored basement of the house, the neighbors found a shallow grave containing a body they were convinced was the older brother. There was no head, and so identification could not be made.
Yeah, they couldn't definitively, like, they couldn't for sure say that this was the brother because there was no head. And nobody knew the brother well enough to look at the body and say whether he had a birthmark or a scar or some kind of notable feature on the body itself. But the neighbors were really horrified to find a decapitated body half buried in the basement. And apparently the younger brother, he actually like broke down and confessed when they found the body that his brother had fallen while they were arguing that night when they were drunk, and he had died as an accident of that fall. And so he panicked and he decided that he had to hide the body because they wouldn't believe him that it was an accident, and that, they would accuse him of murdering his brother. So he decided that the best thing to do would be to take it down either to the Chesapeake Bay or to the local harbor up there in Annapolis. And he was going to tie the body down with rocks and things to weigh it down, and he was going to toss it in the water. Everybody knows that, Maryland here is famous for its crabs. The only place more famous for them is Alaska, where you can catch the real big ones. Maybe even up at Maine you can catch some of the real big king crabs. But we have a lot of crabs in like the bay and the harbor here. A lot of people go crabbing, and apparently crabs will decompose a body and eat it pretty quick, which I did not know, and it actually creeps me out a little bit.
Circle of life.
Yeah, but his plan
We
was
eat them, they eat us.
his plan was to throw the body in the water, weigh it down so it would sink down to the bottom, and let the local wildlife in the water take care of disposing of it for him. His problem was that he wasn't sure how to get the body there without people seeing him. Because even at nighttime, there were at least a few people wandering around down by the water, like running the local businesses and, setting stuff up to leave out early the next morning for the fishermen and things like that. So his big solution was to cut the body up into pieces and make them more manageable to get rid of. And the first thing he did was apparently take an axe and cut the brother's head off, because that's the smallest part of the body, and it would be the easiest part for him to transport. So the story says that he cut off his brother's head with an axe, and then he wrapped it in a cloth of some kind, probably a sheet or a towel or something, and then he hid it under his coat when he left the house. And they have a bridge. It was wooden back then. I'm not sure if it still exists now and is wooden. But they had a bridge that was built in 1870 that connects
Annapolis to the
it
Eastern
connects
Peninsula.
the Annapolis to the Eastern Peninsula, basically what's known as the Eastern Shore here. And so he went down to this bridge and he tossed the head into the water there. And that was the last time the head was seen.
And then once he got home, he was overcome with disgust at the thought of finishing the job. And still too drunk, and so went to bed. After being confronted by the neighbors the next morning, he decided it was too dangerous to finish transporting. So he decided to dig a grave in the basement and try to cover the smell.
Yeah, so what happened is early in the story we heard how after that night where the brothers got really drunk and argued, the neighbors went over there and would like basically shape up. Apparently that same night the brother had cut off the older brother's head and disposed of it. And then when he came home he was, too drunk to bother with, just disposing of the rest of the body. And he was too, I guess, tired from being drunk, because everybody knows you can only hold so much alcohol, and then your body's like wants to shut down so you can recuperate. But
Yeah.
he apparently came home and was really disgusted after he had got rid of the head. I guess because it was finally sinking in that, hey, he had just cut off his brother's head, and so he was like having moments where he was like, oh, this is really disgusting. Why the hell did I do this? He also was too drunk to really want to deal with it that night.
Mm-hmm.
So he just went to bed. And then after he saw the neighbors the next morning, he was like, oh, well, they're warning me of my behavior. They're going to be watching me to make sure I change my behavior. Now it's too risky for me to finish getting rid of this body. I have no choice but to try and bury it in the house and to cover up the smell. And back then, they didn't really have concrete or laminate whatever floors in basements. It was all like dirt floor, because basically that was, you built the house up from the ground. So yeah.
So anyway, from there, it was the humidity that made it impossible to cover it up, and the body was discovered by the horrified neighbors.
Yeah,
The younger brother was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to jail, where he later died.
Yeah, once they found the body, the brother was convicted of manslaughter. He was sent to jail, and he stayed in jail until he died. The house itself was apparently, it says it was cleaned up, and a new family settled in it. They experienced no issues at all until the evening of the day that the guilty brother died in prison. Legend has it that the family in the home was awakened that night by the sound of heavy footsteps coming up the basement steps and into the hall, where they turned toward the front door. Rushing to confront the intruder, the man of the house discovered no one in the hallway and no sign of anyone near the front door. But the door to the basement stood open and the front door was ajar. He pulled the door open and looked out into the night, but saw no one in the street. The legend has it that the headless ghost of the elder brother who was killed wanders down by the water at night, usually around midnight or just after, and he grabs living people and throws them into the water, dragging them down to the bottom so that they can help him find his head. So there's a lot of people who say that if you're going to be up that way after, midnight, you need to have running shoes or be vigilant or all that kind of stuff. The actual ghost story part of it, I don't think there is any truth to. I mean, there's no actual descriptions of people who have had encounters with this, but I think it was just interesting the way the versions differed, because in the Weird Marilyn, they didn't specify whether it was the older or the younger brother who killed the other.
Right.
They said the body was never found, the head was never found. Well, then how do you know a crime was done? The only reason you knew is because this guy on his deathbed, confessed to killing his brother.
Where in the version in the Annapolis book, the body was found.
They make no mention either of the brother who lived going to jail.
Right.
So that was definitely interesting. I do believe the version that haunted Annapolis more than the Weird Marilyn book, just because of the fact that this one actually gave you details.
Right, it did.
I'm not sure which book was, printed first.
I couldn't tell you.
I would have to actually look at the page. Where is it? This book was first published in 2012. This other book. Let's see. Will it tell me?
I would have thought it'd be like a mark on the back or something to give you a hint.
Usually you can find a published date.
I don't know.
Probably up here by the...
As you keep looking.
This one, Weird Marilyn, was published in 2006. So Weird Marilyn was published first. It could be...
So that could explain the discrepancies.
Yeah, that actually could in a way. Because Weird Marilyn, it could be that they heard of the legend, somebody submitted it, and they put it in the book.
Right.
When it came to whoever wrote the Haunted Annapolis, which was Mike Carter and Julia Dray, it's part of the Haunted America series.
Yep.
So, I think what it is that when they did theirs, they just did more research, and they probably, actually included more facts into theirs.
Right.
So a lot of the concepts stayed the same. It was a set of brothers. One died. That was decapitated, body buried. They knew it was what street it was that this all supposedly took place on. The only big difference is that they didn't look far enough into the facts to tell you about whether, about the fact that the one brother was caught, that they did in fact find the body, whereas who wrote Haunted Annapolis actually did more fact digging.
Correct.
And they found those facts.
But of course you also know that with the stories, yeah, we might be skeptical of them, but also it depends really if you believe in ghosts or not.
Yeah, that's true. Personally, I can't tell you whether I believe in ghosts. I believe in karma. I believe that what goes around comes around. A lot of people ask me if I'm religious. I am not religious at all. It's not that I don't believe in God or any of that kind of stuff. I believe that there is a higher power. I am just not going to name that higher power because we have no proof of God's existing. It could be that there is one higher power and it's just worshipped by different cultures under different names. That's my personal belief, though.
Right.
I know my husband's family is mostly Catholic Roman. Not that he actually practices that.
Funny thing is, I'm an ordained minister.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an interesting place to be for me. I didn't say there was no such thing as God. I just said I don't rely on God.
Yeah.
I believe in trying to do stuff on your own first.
And
then if you cannot do it on your own, then yeah, go ahead, ask God for help. But that's how I am, as I do not rely on God. I do not say it does not exist. A lot of my family
is, I mean, when I was younger, I went to a Baptist Sunday school during the summers that my great aunt ran. And
I went to summer, and that summer,
I
went to
when I would stay at my friend's house, if I stayed at her house on a Saturday night, I always ended up being drugged to church with them the next day, and they were Lutheran, but I personally, I don't prescribe to that. Like I said, I believe there is a higher power. I'm just not going to designate who or what it is. I believe that cultures might just worship the same entity in different ways and different names.
I'll probably catch some flack for this because I just love how everybody, when you're in a church, they go, it's God's house. It's God's house. You can't do this here. It's God's house, right? Well, I got news. If God made Earth, isn't the whole Earth God's house?
Technically, yes.
Aren't all the planets God's house? Isn't space God's house? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, we're not going to really get into
even though I may be an ordained minister, I have a problem following organized religion. I've always had a problem with it. I've always felt that the belief is good enough. Acknowledge something's there, good.
Oh, I know diehard religious people that believe in God and everything that entails. And they just don't go to church, is what it is.
Well, what I find interesting,
they worship and practice in their own home. And
what I've always found interesting is I've seen a lot of churchgoers. I have nothing against people going to church. If that is your thing, by all means, go for it. Good for you. But my thing is, I've had talks with people that go to church, right? And then they ask me about my beliefs and stuff, and then I tell them how I do things, and then they look at me and go, wow, you understand God way more than most people. Do you see what I'm saying? So maybe there's a little bit of truth to what I say at times to this, but I'm not going to say that, oh, I'm absolutely correct. It's just how people interpret what I say.
Yeah.
I will never attack somebody's religious beliefs. I would never attack anybody, that relies on God. It's their thing.
Yeah.
I try to treat everybody as equals, and I try to get people to understand that it's okay to have different opinions and still get along. So it goes back to different stuff too. Like I've had people that are kind of like me who, right, where my family, my family believe in ghosts. Back when I lived with my Uncle Tom for a while, he explained stuff to me that would happen in the house. And not even a week later, stuff was happening in the house. Even I was seeing it. But I was not like, oh, that's what it is. I'm not scared. I'm just confused. I'm trying to figure out what's going on here. So I'm like in between being a skeptic and a believer, because I see things sometimes, but I still don't believe it because I'm trying to figure out what's really going on. Our wedding. My aunt went to light the wedding cake. Right? And this was at my uncle's house. The one side of it, the candles kept getting blown out. And everybody believes it was my cousin
Playing a practical
messing with her. Came back to mess with her just for fun. You know what I mean? You know, even my father, a guy that's really like a no-nonsense person, even believes in the supernatural. You know, and don't get me wrong, I've had weird instances happen to me, but I still can't tell you if it was supernatural or if there was something actually behind it that I can explain. So that's why I stay in this gray area, because I'm accepting of both. You know? But I mean, a ghost could come up in front of me, and I wouldn't even know it's a ghost, probably. You see what I'm saying?
Well, one of the things I find really interesting, like I mentioned earlier, my grandparents raised me. My grandfather, because earlier in life, he worked in a boiler room in the Navy on a ship, and then he was a tugboat captain and all that kind. He was a volunteer firefighter. He spent a lot of time around like fumes, and so when he got really sick as he got older, he basically had asbestos in his lungs. And I'm telling everybody right now, watching somebody die that way is very discerning and it's very heartbreaking. That stuff made his lungs so hard that air would not stay in his lungs, it passed through it. Mm-hmm. So he spent the last year of his life on oxygen, and I tell you now, how my sister smokes after watching him die that way, I couldn't tell you. I couldn't do it. You know, watching him gasp for breath and all that.
My aunt, she died from
COPD,
but she got from smoking, and it was very, you know, disturbing on what it did. You know,
it's people that die from stuff like that. It's like watching the life be sucked out of them.
And she was one of the nicest people you would have ever met, and she was really religious, but never got mad over anything.
The point I'm making though is we lost him 4 days after the whole September 11th thing happened, back in 2001.
Yeah.
And so he first died. He actually went like 2 days before that, but they resuscitated him. And when they brought him back, he signed the DNR because, you know, his thought was, if I can't breathe now, why the hell do I want you to bring me back so I can continue to not breathe? And the way he was, I fully respect the fact that he did that. He took the decision out of my grandmother and everybody else's hands because he didn't want them to have to make that decision. And, you know, he was like, I'm not going to get any better. I don't want to be in this kind of position, this kind of pain like that. Don't make them make the choice. I'm going to do it myself. But the whole point of this is that last year I lost my grandmother as well. And so she spent the last 10 months of her life or so in a hospital bed in her living room.
Yeah.
And once she was fully bedridden and couldn't really get out of the bed, we knew it wouldn't be super long. Because when people get confined to a bed like that, they just kind of like slowly give up. And for a while, she did really good. And her birthday is in August. And she was still like, I mean, she was super thin from not eating. Her appetite kind of came and went. And her legs were atrophying because she couldn't get up and move them.
Right.
You know, we tried to exercise them for her as much as we could. But her goal, and she sat down with me and one of my aunts and my uncle, and my aunt and one of my uncles. Mm-hmm. But she sat down with the three of us because we were the ones who really came over and helped her and took care of her. And she laid it all out for us. You know, my uncle was in charge of executor of the estate. He knew all what she wanted done. We were just supposed to give him whatever help he needed. Her goal, though, was to make it to her birthday. Because this would have been... She was born in 27. I'm not sure exactly how old that would have made her.
She was in her 90s. Let's just put it that way. She was in her 90s.
Let me put it this way. My grandfather's birthday just passed.
Yeah.
Like last week. And if he was still alive, he'd be 99 this year.
Right.
She was 4 years younger. So If she would have been around to make it to next month, she would have been 95. So she was, she made it to 94.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's pretty impressive. Her family's known for that kind of stuff, though. Her father was 98 when he died. Her mother was 104 when she passed. But, you know, that was her goal, was making it to her birthday. And then she made it to her birthday, and she was still doing pretty good for a week or two after that. And then suddenly it's like one day we woke up and she was just not herself. She started forgetting things, and this is a woman who you could ask about something that happened 30 years ago. She'll give you dates and doctors' names and everything, every fact that exists about what happened. So her mind was always super sharp. And so the fact she started forgetting things, and she would wake up from naps that she would fall into, and she wouldn't remember where she was or who was there with her. And so we knew it was coming at that point. But she just kept hanging on and hanging on. And,
we did get a good final laugh from her, though.
I
remember that she got a good laugh out of me when she realized I no longer had any hair.
Yeah, the first time she saw Tom after he shaved his head, she just kind of stared at him. And then she looked at me and she was like, he doesn't have any hair.
Wait, Tom's bald!
She was like, Tom's bald, he doesn't have any hair. What happened to his hair? Like, she thought his hair just magically disappeared. But my uncle was saying, you know, I keep telling her, you know, you made it to your birthday, it's okay to go. He was like, I don't understand why she's still hanging on. And it was, you know, the beginning of September at that point. And I told him, I was like, she's waiting for the 15th of September. And he was like, well, why do you say that? And I told him, I was like, oh, like, just watch. And the September 15th, I woke up. And I woke up because my phone was ringing. And my alarm was going to go off in like 5 minutes anyway to get me up and dressed for work. But I looked at my phone, and it was my uncle calling me. And I was like, well, the only reason he's calling me this early in the morning is to tell me that she's on her way out, and if I want to come say a final goodbye, or she's already gone. And apparently my uncle and his sister stayed with her the night before. They just sat on the edges of her bed with her the whole night, like, talking when she was awake, and they just stayed with her till she went. But she had gone earlier that morning, you know, like an hour or so before he called me. You know, he waited until after he had called the authorities for the people from the morgue to come get her and, you know, officially pronounce her and all that, since she died at home. But that was the thing. I knew that she was gonna go that day, and I wasn't really surprised when he called me that morning and told me. And what freaks a lot of people out, because they were like, well, what's the significance of the day? Well, September 15th is 4 days after 9/11. My grandmother went within a 2-hour time frame of my grandfather the same day, exactly 20 years apart. And, you know, I personally think that was what she was waiting for. Yeah, she wanted to make it to her birthday, but she used that as a goal to last well into August in preparation of being like, okay, I made it this long, I can make it to this day. Because my grandmother, after my grandfather passed, she only ever went to the cemetery like 2, maybe 3 times, to my knowledge. You know, she didn't believe in visiting a grave to visit people that weren't here with us anymore. And so she, I guess, felt closer to my grandfather on that day because that's the day that she lost him.
Right.
And so she pushed and she pushed and she waited until that day, because in her own way she believed that on the day he passed, he came back to visit her every year and, you know, basically be like, hey, even though I'm gone, you know, I'm still here with you. And so I personally believe that that's why she pushed and waited for that day, is that way when he came to spend the day with her and visit, he could take her with him back when he left.
Yeah. But I mean, you know, I've had stuff happen. I mean, I know this is kind of a downer, but, you know, we gotta be real at times.
Yeah.
You know, and kind of explain why we're doing what we're doing. And you know how I lost my mother. You know, And
Your mother was one of the nicest people I've ever met in my life.
she was one of the realest people too.
Oh, yes.
But she was like my best friend, you know.
My grandfather was my best friend.
You know, and I lost her when she was 55. I was still in my 20s.
Yeah.
You know, I'm 35 right now. I lost her back in 2008. And you knew it was hard for me, but I remember one time I was left home alone. It was not too long after she had passed. Everybody had left, and I was doing something. And let me explain one thing. I hate people calling me Tommy. All right?
Mm-hmm.
All right? I only allow family to do that. And if I have friends that can say it, it's because I consider them family.
Mm-hmm.
All right? But my mom used to yell for me. All right, and I would go into the bedroom because she couldn't get around too well. And I'd ask her what she needed, and I'd go get it. I remember I was walking into the kitchen, and just out of nowhere, I heard her voice say my name, and my brain didn't even think, wait, she's not here. I immediately walked into her bedroom just to realize she's gone. You know, and I'm thinking, what did I just hear? You know,
Yeah.
it baffled me so much. And the problem is how close I was to my mom. Every anniversary, the exact time she passed, it feels like it's happening all over again.
Watching your mother go the way she did, I mean, really, when you get down to it, your mother had so much wrong with her. She had
Well, let me
lupus.
put it this way. The night she was in the hospital and they kept sending me to the wrong place,
Oh my God, that was annoying.
that was not the fear of God that I put into those nurses. It was the fear of me that I put into those nurses when they knew I was about to break down that door.
All we wanted was to get to the emergency room.
That's
where she
why they
was,
opened
and
that door. They
sent you
knew
the
I
wrong
was going to
place.
go through it.
For them to be like, oh, she's not here, send you to another place. Oh my God.
They knew I was going to break down that door.
I personally, I feel like just in the fact that my grandfather had a say in his own way he went, I feel like your mother kind of did the same thing.
Because my dad was going to be he was going to have to make a very
Your
difficult
mother
choice.
flatlined in the emergency room 3 times.
I watched her.
And the last time we were there.
I watched her die.
When they got her stabilized to move her upstairs to the cardiac care unit.
I know.
I mean, they came out and they told your dad that he was going to have to make a decision if she went again.
And as soon as he said that you're going to have to make a decision,
they
another guy
came out. They
came
even told him that it might be a decision he had to make to just turn the equipment off and let her go.
I know.
And as soon as they came out to tell him he was going to have to make this decision,
another person came out and said she was gone.
You know, she had gone and they couldn't get her back.
You know.
And I think she knew that they were going to make him make that decision, and she was like, I'm just going to take the whole decision out of it. And, you know, as much as you and your brother would have understood why he would have made the decision to let her go, I also think that, you know, at some point she knew that even with you him making the decision for the good reasons, that you guys would kind of resent him a little bit for giving the order.
Well, we probably would have, you know.
Your mother overcame a lot of stuff.
But I remember...
She was one of the strongest people I know.
I remember walking into the room after she had passed for us all to see her one more time.
She was diagnosed with lupus young, and I mean late teens, early 20s, but I mean they told her from the stuff, like they told her she wasn't gonna live all that long. She was 55.
I mean, this is upsetting me now.
Life, but it's a good life.
You can tell I'm getting upset about this, but you know,
told her she wouldn't really be able to have kids. She had 2 boys.
But I remember the last thing I ever got to do that night was I got to kiss her on the forehead to say goodbye.
Yeah, see, I didn't get that with either of my grandparents. Which I actually kind of, like, regret the fact I didn't.
I mean, you can see how much it's hurting me right now.
I will admit, though, that when your mother was hallucinating from that infection in her leg,
I was the only person.
Some of it was so funny though.
I know some of it was, but I remember.
As horrible as that is to say.
But she didn't remember anybody. She couldn't remember my dad. She didn't remember my brother. She didn't remember anybody in the family but me when that was going on.
Yeah, that all cleared up when they had the
We thought when they amputated her leg that, you know, she wasn't going to remember anything. It was going to be fine. And the first thing I remember when they amputated her leg and she woke up, she looked at me and said, "Can you believe they did this to me?" I had never felt so guilty in my life.
Yeah. They Tom's family used to have these two cats. They got them from a litter when the boys were young, Fuzzy and Stripe. They were sisters. And they both loved Tom's mother so much. Like wherever she was, that's where they wanted to be. She was in a chair, they'd climb up there with her. If she was in the bed, they'd climb up there with her.
Fuzzy met my shoe a lot of times at night. She had that alley cat meow, and my bedroom was next to the kitchen, and she'd go in that kitchen, wow, wow, and you hear me yelling, "Shut up!" And then eventually you would just hear a loud thud, and she'd go quiet. And it's because I threw a shoe at her. Like 3 in the morning every night.
The fact of it is when his mother still, before they amputated her leg and she had the infection in it, and she was hallucinating. You know, your dad got her some balloons and she thought it was a bear? Or something like that?
No, there were some balloons with some, like a plant he got her, and she imagined Stripe wearing cowboy boots for some reason.
And then there was a roll of toilet paper on the bed she was using to blow her nose, and I remember us running into her room because she was screaming bloody murder, and Tom comes bursting through her bedroom door, and he's like, "What's wrong, Mom? What's wrong?" She somehow hallucinated the fact that roll of toilet paper was Fuzzy's head. Like, she seriously thought somebody had cut her cat's head off.
She thought I did it. And I went, well, when she did it, I kind of was humorous. And I went, "No, I didn't do it yet." That's what I said to her.
I mean, the stuff she imagined, she hallucinated things to be was kind of funny.
Some of it was downright scary, though.
But, oh my God.
Some of it was downright scary in the hospital. Because before they did the amputation, she kept imagining that there was a man coming through the wall at her.
Yeah, it was really weird.
You know, so I had to act like, you know, that it was there. You know, and that I was going to hold it off.
She kept seeing this man, like this shadowy man who would like walk through the walls and then the closed doors and stuff.
And she would tell me where it was, and I would go over to it and act like I'm getting ready to fight it, just to calm her down. I remember that. Yeah. But I also remember when, because I mean, she still remembered who I was, which I didn't understand at first, I guess, why that was. But, you know, the first time I realized she was hallucinating, walked into her room and I see her doing this motion. And I'm looking at her and go, "What are you doing?" She says, "I'm packing." I said, "Packing for what?" You know, "Because I'm leaving." And I said, "Where are you going?" She's like, "I'm going home." I went, "Where's home?" You know, and it's like she described like her childhood house or something like that, you know. You know, so, and at that point, it's kind of like, I know I can't convince her it's not real. You know, so it's just like, okay. You know, I just went, "Okay, well, you keep packing," you know, and I walked out, and then I would tell Dad what was going on and stuff like that, you know, and...
Mm. You know, we've completely gotten off topic.
It's a podcast. It doesn't matter. You know, the fact is, we did the episode. We're allowed to talk about whatever we want.
I know.
You know, but this explains part of the reason why we are the way we are. You know.
Everybody,
but like,
I feel like...
when she saw the Shadow Man, right? I've heard stories
about Shadow Man.
About Shadow Man. So that's part of the reason I acted defensive. Because it's like, she might be able to see this. I don't know if it's real. You know, I don't know if it could hurt me. You know, but it's like, I'll be
some people
damned.
say that you can only see these type of figures if you're close to death
But the way I saw it is, I'll be damned if it wants, if it wants to get her, it's going through me. So that's why I kept asking her where it was. You know? Because it's like, if this thing's real, it's going to have to hurt me to get her. That's how I did it. You know?
So I'm kind of in favor of our next episode being kind of like death omens or bringers of, you know, things like banshees and
maybe
all that.
No, don't feel sorry for us because of the stories we've told.
No, everybody.
The thing is, the part of it is what molds us into what we are today. You know.
Everybody has experiences, whether they believe in the paranormal or not. They've had things that have happened to them similar to these kind of stories, where things have happened that they couldn't explain. Whether they choose to believe they're paranormal in nature or just something that they can't explain, that's up to the person.
I mean,
but every person alive has experiences similar to these.
But even she'll tell you, chances are, if we came in contact with something that was an actual ghost and she knew it was a ghost and she told me it was a ghost, I'd probably try to punch it just because, you know, why not? I'm that type of guy. It's kind of like, hey, I've never taken on one of these before. You know what I mean? So I'd probably try to fight it just to see what it would do.
On that note, though, this might be a good place to leave it.
Yeah, probably.
So I think we're gonna go ahead and leave it here for this week. Hopefully you guys had fun with the horsemen. Not really horsemen, 2 of them were, but the Headless Ghost stories. Hopefully you guys had some fun with those.
Hopefully none of you lost your heads over it. Oh, come on, I gotta do the corny puns. That's my thing.
Ugh.
I might not be a dad, but I can still do the horrible dad jokes.
But yeah, hopefully you guys had fun with the ones we did find and research this week. We would have done more and drug out the actual podcast with more Headless Ghosts. Unfortunately, we had a couple of things happen earlier in the week. Tom wasn't feeling very well. I was rushing around, like, getting him a doctor's appointment so we could figure out, you know.
And now we have a really bad health scare happening because of that. So I've been kind of losing my mind over it again.
Yeah, so we've been focusing on him feeling a bit better. So I've been a little preoccupied with him this week. So I actually didn't do my research earlier in the week like I normally do.
We actually did it right before we recorded this.
I spent about an hour and a half researching, and then we took a break for dinner, and then we decided to just go ahead and record.
Sad part is, back when we did the original Through the Doorway, I was horrible with that too. I did my research like an hour before.
So I promise to get my research started.
I mean, we both did research. Don't think I just make her do all the research. It's a shared thing. She comes up with an idea, and then I come up with an idea. We try to work them together, and then we both look for info to, you know, help one another out.
I do all the note-taking, though, because my handwriting is so much better.
It's not my fault. Back in 2nd grade, they taught me to write cursive.
It's weird. His cursive is beautiful compared to mine, but my printing is a lot better than his.
My printing is that of a 1st grader's, unfortunately. That's the way it looks, because 2nd grade, when I know a lot of kids nowadays, actually most people have probably even watched this at some point, they did away with cursive in schools. But when I was growing up in 2nd grade, everybody learned to write in cursive. And then for the rest of your school career, until high school, actually, you know, you weren't allowed to write in print. You had to write in cursive. Then in high school, you got an option. So here I am, who only wrote in print for like maybe 2 years, right? And then writing cursive all those other years. My print sucks.
See, that was the different thing about my schooling. Yes, they taught us cursive, but everything we did, basically, I mean, we could choose to write in cursive if we really wanted to. But,
It was mandatory for me.
It wasn't mandatory. For the most part, the only thing that my teachers demanded to be in cursive were when we would have to turn in, like, reports or essays. Or word questions on tests when you had to, like, physically write in.
Well, and the funny part, though, if I ever need to have a message, secret from certain generations, all I gotta do is write in cursive. That's the funny part. I'm not really picking on anybody, it's a joke, but But yeah, I guess we should probably wrap this up.
I promise to at least start my research this weekend. Give it a little bit of a jump start so I can figure out exactly what we might want to do our episode on. And then I can do a little bit more in-depth research on the beginning of this coming week.
Yeah.
So we're gonna do that. I'm gonna try to get the research started and the material prepped sooner than I did this week. We may or may not have some more people joining us on the next episode. I've got to talk to them first. We have some friends that are interested in helping, but like I said, anybody who joins is going to pull their own weight. So I might give them one or two of the things we want to do and let them do the research on it. I might invite them over to our house. That way they have access to the same books we do. Because I prefer doing a lot of our research out of the books we have here at the house. That way I can tell you where we found it. And I can show you.
Yeah.
I mean, pictures and things like that. I don't want to be one of those... Like, the Sleepy Hollow I just found online on Wikipedia. Because
I even stated before that some of the stuff may come from the internet, but we'll tell you where we found it.
Yeah.
We'll always tell you where we found the stuff, where we sourced it from, so you can find it,
Yeah. So we're at least this way, if I get them over here to do do research one day, then at least we'll have the books here and we'll know that everybody's on the same page with where the information came from.
Yep.
But me and Tom are going to talk to them about whether they do still want to join and, come up with some kind of plan for when they would come over to help research, when we wanted to record the next episode, and we'll go from there. But yeah, we'll try to be a little bit more diligent in doing our research properly and on time, so that
we usually are more diligent. It's just been a rough week.
Yeah, it was such last minute. It was getting to the point where, we had to get ready to record or we would be late getting the podcast video done.
And part of the problem is
which is why we really only researched the 3. Otherwise, I'd have kept going and researched at least 5.
But the problem is when my health interferes. We'll eventually probably explain what's wrong with me at some point, but I don't really want to get into that yet. When the timing's right, things will be explained so you'll understand why sometimes, what happens with me gets in the way.
He's got some medical tests his doctor wants him to get done, so we're gonna worry about getting those scheduled and taken care of. And then once he's got the results of those and he knows whether it's something for him to be freaked out about or not, then we'll figure out what he does and does not want to put out there in the podcast.
Pretty much.
But for now, I think we're just going to leave this here. We did get more views on the last video than I realistically expected us to be completely honest. So, yay.
Yeah, but a little
Thanks.
more, if we could get a little more feedback, that would be awesome. If there's something you want us to do, if there's something you think we should do to improve this, let us know in the comments.
Yeah,
I do read the comments.
Like we said last time, if there's something specific you want us to look into researching and doing on one of these episodes, let us know.
I mean, there's also Twitter. You could hit me up on Twitter.
Anybody who wants to potentially be part of it, you know, let us know too. We our friends it's a married couple. They live locally, so they would probably just come over here to be part of the recording. We would rearrange how this is set up so everybody would be in view.
It's either that or Discord would be used.
But if you want to be involved but you don't want to be on camera, that's what Discord is for.
Yeah.
So we could always link you in through Discord, and that way your voice would be there to contribute what you want to do without. And for people who aren't physically here with us when we're recording, what I'll end up doing is we'll figure out what we want to be in the episode, and I'll just make copies of the notes, whether that's scanning them into the computer to put in the Discord so that you have access to what we're looking at.
Right.
Or making physical copies on the printer so that you have a copy in your hand while we're here recording. You know, but that's one of the big things is we want everybody to be on the same page who's part of this. So yeah, just if you have anything you want to see us do, if you have any comments, if you have any suggestions, if you want to be part of it, you know, just drop a comment, let us know. And if you don't want to leave it in a public comment on the video, just feel free to go ahead and track Cypher, you know, track Tom down on Twitter.
There's 2 Twitter pages. Through the Doorway has its own, and then of course there's mine. And the links are all on the YouTube page.
Yeah.
If you go to the channel, there's little links up top that you can click on.
Is there a Facebook page linked?
I believe there is a Facebook page linked as well.
Yeah, I think there's a Facebook page linked, so you could also go to that Facebook page and send a message that way. If you don't have a Twitter account and all that. Pretty much everybody has a Facebook. Like 8 in 10 people have a Facebook, so, you know. That's another way we can do it.
All right.
But we're gonna go ahead and sign off for this episode.
Yep.
And we'll definitely see you guys next time. Hope to hear from more people in the comment section.
So till next time, we will see you through the doorway. See you later.